The Mediterranean sunset was perfect for his revenge plan, but when she announced who fathered her twins, guests watched his bride-to-be jump overboard in shock. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Yasmin Johnson stood before the bathroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she rehearsed the words that would forever change her life. The pregnancy test, now tucked away in her purse, had shown 2 unmistakable pink lines 3 days ago, but she'd waited for the right moment to share the news. "Marcus, we're having a baby," she whispered to her reflection, trying to perfect the blend of joy and confidence she wanted to project. At 26, she hadn't planned this pregnancy, but the initial shock had quickly transformed into a quiet excitement that grew with each passing hour. She smoothed down her emerald green dress, Marcus's favorite, and touched the small diamond pendant he'd given her last Christmas. 5 years together, building a life in this luxurious Tribeca grand apartment that felt more like his domain than their shared space. Tonight would change that. Tonight would cement them as family. The dining table was set with meticulous care, their finest china, crystal wine glasses, one she wouldn't use, and a small gift box hidden beneath his napkin containing a pair of miniature baby shoes she'd impulsively purchased yesterday. Yasmin adjusted the centerpiece of white roses, lighting the tapered candles as the Manhattan skyline began to twinkle through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Running late. Board meeting dragged on. ETA 45 minutes." Yasmin sighed but smiled. His work as a political consultant for rising Republican candidates kept him busy, especially as his reputation for crafting winning campaigns grew. She turned down the oven, preserving the rack of lamb she'd prepared, his favorite meal for their 5-year anniversary. When the elevator finally chimed at 9:15, nearly 2 hours after their planned dinner time, Yasmin had already extinguished and relit the candles twice. Marcus Reynolds entered with the commanding presence that had first attracted her when they'd met at a cybersecurity conference where she was presenting. Tall, with sharp features and the confident stride of someone accustomed to attention, he loosened his tie with one hand while checking his phone with the other. "Sorry I'm late," he said, barely looking up. "The Hendricks campaign is imploding because some intern leaked strategy documents. I had to do damage control all evening." "It's okay," Yasmin said, rising to kiss him. "Happy anniversary." He returned the kiss distractedly, his eyes still reflecting the stress of his day. "Is that lamb? Smells good, but I need a drink first." Yasmin's carefully planned moment began to slip away as Marcus poured himself a generous whiskey instead of the champagne she'd set out. She watched him down half the glass before he even took off his suit jacket. "Rough day?" she asked, trying to guide the evening back to her plan. "Brutal. Hendricks could be my ticket to the national stage, and now we're scrambling." He finally looked at her, seeming to notice her dress and the table setting. "You look nice. Sorry again for being late." "It's our anniversary," she reminded him gently. 5 years. "Right, of course." He nodded, though his tone suggested he'd forgotten. 5 years. Time flies. They sat for dinner, Marcus immediately launching into a detailed account of his workplace drama while Yasmin served the food, her heart pounding as she waited for a moment to interject with her news. The gift box remained hidden, the perfect moment elusive as Marcus continued talking about campaign strategies and political maneuvers. "And then the governor calls me directly asking if we can salvage this mess, which of course we can, but—" He paused, finally noticing Yasmin's unusual silence. "You're quiet tonight. Everything okay at work?" Yasmin took a deep breath. The moment wasn't perfect, but it was now or never. "Marcus, I have news." She reached across the table for his hand. "We're having a baby." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something darker as he processed her words. "You're pregnant?" His voice was flat, emotionless. Yasmin nodded, her rehearsed joy faltering under his cold gaze. 3 months. I found out last week." I wanted to be sure before I told you." Marcus withdrew his hand from hers and reached for his whiskey, draining the glass. When he set it down, his face had transformed into a mask she'd never seen before. Calculating, distant, almost cruel. "This isn't part of the plan, Yasmin." "Plans change," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "We've talked about having a family someday." "Someday, not now. Not when I'm on the verge of breaking into national politics." He stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. "Do you have any idea what this means for my career trajectory?" Confusion and hurt bloomed in Yasmin's chest. "What are you saying? That this is bad timing?" Marcus turned, his expression now perfectly controlled, as if he were addressing a difficult client rather than the woman he'd shared his life with for 5 years. "A mixed-race child would be political suicide in the circles I'm moving in, Yasmin. Let's be realistic." The words hit her like physical blows. "What?" "Washington isn't ready for an interracial couple in conservative politics," he continued, his tone eerily matter-of-fact. "My base wouldn't accept it. The donors I've cultivated would distance themselves." Yasmin felt the room tilt slightly. "You've never talked like this before. We've been together for 5 years. You've introduced me to your colleagues, your family. As my girlfriend, yes. A brilliant cybersecurity expert who enhances my image. But as the mother of my child?" He shook his head. "The optics don't work, Yasmin. You have to see that." "Optics?" She stood now too, her dinner forgotten. "We're talking about our baby, Marcus, not some political strategy." "Everything is political when you're building the career I am." His voice hardened. "And frankly, you've never had the refinement necessary to be the wife of someone with my ambitions." The words sliced through her with surgical precision. 5 years of love, of building a life together, reduced to refinement and optics. "What are you saying?" she asked, though part of her already knew the devastating answer. "I'm saying this pregnancy doesn't fit into my future." Marcus walked to the bar cart, pouring another whiskey with steady hands that betrayed how calculated this moment was. "I've been meaning to talk to you about changes I've been considering." "Changes?" Yasmin's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I've met someone more suitable for my image. Rebecca Bancroft. You might know the family name. The Bancroft banking dynasty. Old money. White money." "How long?" Yasmin managed, feeling as if she were standing outside her body, watching this nightmare unfold. 3 months. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "It's been clear to me for some time that our paths were diverging. This pregnancy just forces the timeline." 3 months, the exact length of her pregnancy. While she'd been experiencing morning sickness and daydreaming about their future family, he'd been planning his exit strategy with another woman. "You've been cheating on me while I'm carrying your child?" The words tasted like acid. "I've been securing my future," he corrected coldly. "And now you need to think about yours." Marcus walked to his briefcase, retrieved a checkbook, and wrote with deliberate strokes. He tore out the check and placed it on the coffee table between them. $10,000, he said. "That should be enough for you to restart your life somewhere else." Yasmin stared at the check, unable to process that he was attempting to pay her off like an inconvenient business expense. "I don't want your money," she finally said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want you to explain how 5 years together means nothing to you." "It meant something," he acknowledged, a brief flash of something like regret crossing his features before the political mask returned. "But not enough to sacrifice everything I've worked for. A child, especially a black child, would end my political future before it begins." The naked racism in his statement shocked her into silence. This wasn't a stranger. This was the man who had held her through her father's funeral, who had celebrated her promotions, who had whispered promises of forever against her skin countless nights in their shared bed. "Don't contact me again," Marcus continued, picking up his phone to check messages as if they were concluding a minor business meeting. "My lawyer will reach out about formal arrangements to ensure your discretion." "You think you can buy my silence?" Yasmin found her voice again, anger beginning to burn through the shock. "I think you're practical enough to understand how this works." He glanced at her with cold assessment. "Take the money, Yasmin. You'll need it. You'll never be anything but a burden to any man, especially with a child to support." The casual cruelty of his words stunned her. This was Marcus, stripped of all pretense, the real man beneath the charming facade she'd loved for 5 years. "Get out," she whispered. "I'll be staying at the Pierre tonight. I'll send for the rest of my things tomorrow. You have until the end of the month to find new accommodations. The lease is in my name." In a daze, Yasmin watched as Marcus collected his briefcase and a few personal items with efficient movements. 5 years reduced to a few minutes of packing and a dismissive check on the coffee table. At the door, he paused. "This is for the best, Yasmin. You'll see that eventually." The elevator doors closed on his face, handsome, composed, and utterly foreign to her now. Yasmin stood frozen in the apartment that had been their home, candles still flickering over the uneaten anniversary dinner, the hidden gift of baby shoes still waiting under his napkin for a moment that would never come. She walked to the coffee table, picked up the check, and studied it. $10,000 to erase a 5-year relationship and an unborn child. The sum that Marcus thought adequate to buy her disappearance. With deliberate movements, she tore the check into tiny pieces, letting them fall like confetti. "We'll do this our way, little one," she whispered, her hand finding her still flat stomach. Tears finally came, hot and furious, but through them, a steel resolve began to form. She would not disappear. She would not be erased. 15 years later, when presidential candidate Marcus Reynolds saw the billionaire CEO's name on the conference panel, he could never have imagined that the torn check would be the best investment Yasmin Johnson had ever refused. The confetti of torn check pieces scattered across the polished floor of what had been their shared home, now just another space that would soon no longer be hers. Yasmin wiped the tears from her face, a strange calm replacing the initial shock. She had exactly 28 days to rebuild her life from scratch. By morning, the practicalities of her situation had crystallized with brutal clarity. The apartment lease was indeed solely in Marcus's name, a detail she'd never questioned during their 5 years together. Her savings, while respectable for a cybersecurity specialist, wouldn't sustain Manhattan rent for long, especially not with a baby on the way. Yasmin methodically packed her belongings, surprised by how little she truly owned. 5 years reduced to 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. The furniture, the art, even most of the kitchenware, all Marcus's carefully curated possessions, selected to project the image of sophisticated success he so desperately cultivated. Her phone rang incessantly. Marcus's lawyer, calling to ensure she understood the generous offer, had an expiration date. She let it go to voicemail each time. Standing in the bedroom they'd shared, Yasmin caught her reflection in the full-length mirror. "You'll never be anything but a burden to any man," Marcus had said with such cold certainty. The words echoed in her mind as she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "We don't need him," she told her reflection. "We never did." The doorman's sympathetic expression when she dragged her suitcases through the lobby told her Marcus had already shared some version of events, likely painting her as the unstable girlfriend he'd magnanimously supported until things didn't work out. Thomas, who had greeted her warmly every day for 5 years, now couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Where should I tell the movers to send the rest of your things, Ms. Johnson?" he asked quietly. "I'll be in touch with an address," she replied, dignity intact despite the humiliation burning through her veins. On the bustling Manhattan sidewalk, Yasmin paused, overwhelmed by the suddenly intimidating city around her. She'd come to New York 6 years ago, confident and ambitious. Now she stood alone, pregnant, and effectively homeless. Her first call was to her mother in Chicago, hoping against hope for support she knew likely wouldn't come. Their relationship had been strained since Yasmin chose career over returning home after college. "I told you that white man would never marry you," her mother said after Yasmin explained the situation, her voice heavy with an "I told you so" fatalism that offered no comfort. "Come home. You can stay in your old room until you figure things out." The thought of returning to Chicago defeated, pregnant, and jobless made Yasmin's stomach turn. "I need to make this work on my own terms, Mom." "Suit yourself. You always do." The conversation ended with a promise to stay in touch that both women knew would remain largely unfulfilled. Yasmin checked into a modest hotel, calculating she could afford 2 weeks before her finances became critical. Sitting on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, she made a list of priorities: job, housing, medical care. Boston emerged as a logical destination, far enough from Marcus to avoid painful encounters, close enough to her distant Aunt Loretta who lived in the suburbs and might provide occasional support. The week that followed was a brutal education in just how quickly security could evaporate. Every interview she secured ended the same way: initial interest in her impressive technical credentials, followed by subtle shifts in body language when her pregnancy became apparent during conversation. No one explicitly mentioned her condition. That would be illegal. But the rejections came with remarkable consistency. "We're looking for someone who can commit to intensive travel," one hiring manager explained apologetically. "The team culture involves lots of late nights and weekend work," said another. By the time she boarded the bus to Boston, Yasmin had learned to wear loose clothing and steer conversations away from personal details, but the pattern continued unbroken. Each rejection chipped away at the confident professional identity she'd spent years building. Boston welcomed her with unseasonably cold rain, as if the city itself was warning her of the challenges ahead. The women's shelter she'd located online had a 2-week waiting list, but a compassionate intake coordinator found her a temporary spot in a converted church basement. "Just until something opens up," the woman explained, showing Yasmin to a cot separated from others by thin partitions. "Most of our residents are escaping domestic violence, but we make exceptions for emergency situations." That night, listening to muffled sobs from neighboring partitions, Yasmin stared at the water-stained ceiling and calculated trimester dates against potential employment timelines. The reality was stark. By the time she'd be visibly pregnant to strangers, she needed steady income and housing. Her Aunt Loretta's response to her situation was tepid at best. "I wish I could help more, honey, but my place is too small, and Richard's health isn't good," she explained over coffee at a diner near the shelter. "I can maybe loan you a little something to get started." The little something turned out to be $300, a kindness Yasmin accepted with genuine gratitude while knowing it wouldn't even cover a security deposit in Boston's ruthless housing market. By her second week in Boston, desperation drove Yasmin to accept 2 jobs far beneath her qualifications: morning shifts at a cafe near the financial district and evening telemarketing for a local charity. Between shifts, she hunted for affordable housing and continued sending out resumes for positions matching her expertise, each rejection further confirming Marcus's cruel assessment of her worth. The cafe job proved unexpectedly educational. Serving coffee to investment bankers and tech executives, Yasmin eavesdropped on conversations about security protocols and software vulnerabilities, the very topics she'd once discussed as a peer rather than an invisible service worker. "The encryption protocol they're using is a joke," she heard one man in an expensive suit tell his colleague. "Anyone with basic penetration testing skills could breach it." Yasmin bit her tongue as she refilled their cups, remembering Marcus's frequent dismissal of her technical insights at dinner parties. "Yasmin's hobbies are charming," he'd say with that condescending smile, "but let's leave the serious tech talk to the professionals." The telemarketing position was soul-crushing work. Night after night, Yasmin read scripts into her headset, facing rejection and occasional verbal abuse from annoyed recipients. Her feet swelled from standing all day at the cafe, her back ached from the uncomfortable chair at the call center, and morning sickness plagued her regardless of the hour. By the third month, Yasmin had secured a tiny studio apartment in a building that overlooked a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The rent consumed nearly 70% of her income, but it was hers, the first tangible victory since Marcus's betrayal. Each week presented new calculations: vitamins or fresh vegetables, new shoes for her swelling feet or saving for the doctor's appointment. The cafe manager's eyes increasingly tracked to her growing midsection, and Yasmin knew her time there was limited. One particularly exhausting evening, after 16 hours of combined work shifts, Yasmin noticed lights still on at a community computer lab she passed on her walk home. The door was propped open as a maintenance worker mopped the floors. "You closing soon?" she asked, drawn to the computers like a moth to flame. It had been weeks since she'd had access to proper technology. 20 minutes, the janitor shrugged. "Help yourself." Yasmin slipped into a seat at the back row, fingers flying across the keyboard with muscle memory that felt like greeting an old friend. For a blissful hour, the janitor had kindly extended her time. She lost herself in code, scanning tech forums and security bulletin boards, her natural habitat before life had unraveled. A post about a local startup caught her attention. They were launching a banking app with what sounded like worryingly inadequate security protocols. Curiosity piqued. Yasmin ran a basic scan on their public-facing website and immediately identified 3 significant vulnerabilities that could potentially expose customer data. The ethical decision took only seconds. She drafted a detailed email to the company's founder, explaining the security issues and suggesting fixes. She hit send at 11:30 at night, expecting nothing in return. The reply came at 6:30 the next morning as Yasmin prepared for her cafe shift. "Need to talk ASAP. These vulnerabilities are serious. Name your price and location for a meeting today. Thomas Chen, CEO, Chen Tech Solutions." Her hands trembled as she read the email 3 times. Price, location, the language of someone who valued what she offered. They met during her lunch break, Yasmin still wearing her cafe uniform with its coffee stains and name tag. Thomas Chen was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with intense focus and none of the condescension she'd grown accustomed to. "How did you find these vulnerabilities?" he asked after they'd ordered coffee in the same cafe where she'd served customers all morning, her manager watching curiously from behind the counter. "Basic penetration testing. Your authentication protocol has multiple entry points that—" Yasmin stopped, noticing Chen's growing smile. "What?" "I've had 3 security consultants miss what you found in one evening," he said. "What firm are you with?" The question hung between them, a crossroads. Yasmin could fabricate a consulting position, maintain the professional facade she'd perfected during her years with Marcus. Instead, she gestured to her uniform. "I work here, and telemarketing in the evenings." She met his eyes directly. "But before that, I was a senior security specialist at Draytech Systems in Manhattan." Chen's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as he looked more carefully at her condition. "And now?" "Now I'm starting over." The simplicity of the statement carried the weight of everything she didn't say. Chen nodded slowly. "I need someone who sees what others miss. The consulting firms we've hired have been useless, following checklists without understanding real-world threats." He pushed a business card across the table. "Can you start tomorrow? As a consultant, your rate is double whatever they were paying you at Draytech." 4 months later, in her small but clean apartment, Yasmin held her newborn daughter Alexandria for the first time. The delivery had been difficult, 36 hours of labor ending in an emergency C-section, but the weight of the tiny girl against her chest made every moment of struggle worthwhile. "It's just us now," she whispered to Alexandria's perfect, sleeping face. The consulting work for Chen Tech had become steady, Thomas Chen proving to be that rarest of creatures, a boss who valued results over appearances. The income wasn't lavish, but it covered rent, medical bills, and even allowed for the second-hand crib where Alexandria would soon sleep. As the first light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains, Yasmin made a promise to her daughter and to herself. "I will build an empire so large that when he sees us again, he'll be on his knees." While sleeping that night in the narrow bed beside Alexandria's crib, Yasmin couldn't know that in a decade, her discovery of a security vulnerability in the Bancroft banking system would be the first step in a revenge she hadn't planned, but that fate would meticulously orchestrate. The weak winter light filtered through the cafe windows as Yasmin wiped down a table, pausing to observe two tech executives engaged in animated conversation about data breaches. She strained to hear their technical discussion while pretending to focus on cleaning nearby tables. The exploit they used was so basic, any decent security team should have caught it, said the man in the expensive charcoal suit, gesturing with his cappuccino. His colleague nodded sagely. That's what happens when companies prioritize features over security. They're paying for it now with that class action lawsuit. Yasmin's fingers itched to join their conversation. 3 months ago, she would have been at a similar table, respected and heard. Now, at 7 months pregnant, she was invisible, just another service worker in a coffee-stained apron. "More coffee, gentlemen?" she asked, approaching with a fresh pot. They barely glanced up, nodding without breaking their conversation. As she poured, one man continued, "Their encryption was fundamentally flawed. Anyone with basic penetration testing skills could have identified it." "Actually," Yasmin said before she could stop herself, "the vulnerability wasn't in the encryption but in the authentication protocol. The tokens weren't properly validated after the initial handshake." Both men turned to stare at her. The first recovered quickly, his surprise morphing into condescension. "Well, aren't you full of surprises?" he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Our little barista is a cybersecurity expert." His companion chuckled. "Maybe we should hire her instead of that consulting firm charging us a fortune." Their laughter followed Yasmin back to the counter, Marcus's voice echoing in her memory. "Your programming hobby is charming, dear, but let's leave the technical discussions to the professionals." The cafe shift dragged on for 8 hours, her back aching and feet swollen by closing time. With barely an hour to eat something resembling dinner, a protein bar and an apple, she headed to her telemarketing job, where she would spend another 4 hours being hung up on by irritated strangers. By 10:30 that night, Yasmin's eyes burned from exhaustion. Her nighttime walk home took her past a small community center where a light still glowed from the computer lab. She hesitated, drawn to the window like a moth to flame. A custodian mopped the floor inside, nodding when he saw her peering in. "Need to use the computers? I'm not locking up for another 20 minutes. Could I? Just for a few minutes?" The desperation in her voice was embarrassing, but the pull of technology, her true element, was too strong to resist. "Go ahead. I'll give you a holler when I'm finishing up." Yasmin slipped into the chair, feeling the familiar comfort of a keyboard beneath her fingers. For the first time in months, something inside her relaxed as code appeared on the screen, responding to her commands. This was where she belonged, not serving coffee or reading telemarketing scripts. She started by checking job listings, then browsed tech forums for updates on security vulnerabilities. A post caught her attention. A local startup called Chen Tech had just announced a mobile banking application. Curious, Yasmin navigated to their website, immediately noticing potential security issues in their API documentation. The custodian approached. "Gotta lock up in 5 minutes, miss." "Just a few more minutes, please," she begged. "I'm checking something important." He glanced at her pregnant belly, his expression softening. "All right. Take your time. I'll clean the other rooms first." With borrowed time, Yasmin conducted a basic penetration test on Chen Tech's public-facing interface. Within minutes, she identified 3 critical vulnerabilities that could potentially expose customer banking data. If exploited, These flaws could devastate the startup and compromise thousands of users. A younger version of herself might have exploited such weaknesses to prove her skills. The Yasmin who had slept in a shelter and counted pennies for prenatal vitamins made a different choice. She documented the vulnerabilities in detail, including suggestions for remediation, and composed an email to the CEO, whose contact information she found on their website. "I've identified several critical security vulnerabilities in your banking application's pre-release version," she wrote. "These issues could potentially expose customer financial data. I've attached technical details and suggested fixes. This information is provided ethically, with no expectation of compensation." She hit send at 11:45, just as the custodian returned with keys jingling. "Really need to lock up now, miss." "Thank you," Yasmin said, logging off. "You have no idea how much I needed that." Back in her tiny apartment, Yasmin collapsed onto her narrow bed, too exhausted even to change clothes. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, another doctor's appointment tomorrow that she couldn't afford. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of what she was fighting for. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, hands cradling her belly. Somehow. Her phone chimed with an email notification at 6:15 the next morning. Still half asleep, Yasmin fumbled to read it. "Ms. Johnson, your security assessment is concerning and accurate. We need to discuss this immediately. Name your price and meeting location. Thomas Chen, CEO, Chen Tech Solutions." Fully awake now, Yasmin read the email 3 times. The tone wasn't accusatory, but urgent and respectful. Name your price. When was the last time anyone had valued her skills enough to use those words? She replied, suggesting they meet during her lunch break at the cafe where she worked. It wasn't ideal, but she couldn't afford to miss a shift. Thomas Chen arrived precisely at noon, a compact man in his early 30s with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. He scanned the cafe until he spotted Yasmin, still in her work uniform, waiting at a corner table. "Ms. Johnson?" He extended his hand. "Thomas Chen, thank you for reaching out about our security issues." The simple courtesy of a handshake, of being treated as a professional, nearly broke her composure. "Please, sit down," she managed. "I have 45 minutes before I need to get back to work." Chen studied her, taking in the cafe uniform and her advanced pregnancy with a quick, non-judgmental glance. "You identified vulnerabilities that our paid security consultants missed. How did you find them so quickly?" "Your authentication protocol has multiple entry points that aren't properly validated after session establishment," Yasmin explained, slipping into technical language with relief. "The token generation method is predictable if someone captures enough samples, and your database calls aren't properly sanitized against injection attacks." Chen leaned forward, clearly impressed. "Where did you learn security analysis at this level?" The question hung between them. Yasmin could lie, maintain the fiction of being a security professional moonlighting as a barista. Instead, she chose honesty. "I was senior security specialist at Draytech Systems in Manhattan until recently," she said. "Life circumstances changed. Now I serve coffee and work telemarketing in the evenings." Understanding dawned in Chen's eyes as he glanced again at her pregnancy. "Draytech has an excellent reputation. Why would they let someone with your skills go?" "They didn't. I left." She didn't elaborate. Chen nodded slowly. "Well, their loss is potentially my gain. I need someone who sees what others miss. The firms we've hired have been useless, following checklists without understanding real-world threats." He slid a business card across the table. "Can you start tomorrow, as a consultant? Your rate is double whatever they were paying you at Draytech." Yasmin stared at the card, her vision momentarily blurring. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Mr. Chen. Call me Thomas, and yes, I noticed." He smiled slightly. "My mother was a programmer who coded until the day I was born. Talent doesn't stop for childbirth. It just multiplies." For the first time in months, Yasmin felt a flicker of hope, not just for survival, but for rebuilding. 3 months later, Chentech had become her professional home. Thomas had given her a flexible schedule and meaningful work, treating her pregnancy as inconsequential to her value. Her small desk in the corner of their modest office became the first place since leaving Manhattan where she felt like herself again. The contractions started during a late-night coding session. Yasmin had been implementing enhanced security protocols for Chentech's growing client list when the first pain gripped her lower back. By the time she reached the hospital, the contractions were coming every 6 minutes. 36 hours later, after an emergency C-section, Yasmin held Alexandria for the first time. Exhausted but elated, she counted 10 perfect fingers and 10 tiny toes, marveling at the fierce love that overwhelmed her. "It's just us now," she whispered to Alexandria's sleeping face, tracing the delicate curve of her cheek. "But we're going to be extraordinary together." A soft knock interrupted the moment. Thomas stood in the doorway, awkwardly holding a small package. "Is it okay to come in?" he asked hesitantly. "Of course." Yasmin adjusted the hospital blanket, suddenly conscious of her appearance after the marathon delivery. Thomas approached the bed, his expression softening as he gazed at Alexandria. "She's beautiful, Yasmin. Thank you for coming, for everything." The words felt inadequate for the lifeline he had thrown her. "I brought something." He handed her the package. "It's not much, but I thought—" Inside was a tiny laptop, not a toy, but a miniature functional computer with child-safe casing. "For when she's ready to follow in her mother's footsteps," Thomas explained. The gesture, this acknowledgement of Alexandria's potential future, broke something inside Yasmin. Tears she had held back for months finally spilled over. Thomas tactfully pretended not to notice, focusing instead on technical specifications. "It's programmable for children as young as 3. My cousin's kids have the same model." "It's perfect," Yasmin managed. "Thank you." After Thomas left, Yasmin held Alexandria in the quiet hospital room, watching her daughter's peaceful breathing. The tiny laptop sat on the bedside table, a symbol of possibility rather than just a gift. 2 weeks later, in her small apartment with Alexandria finally asleep in the second-hand crib, Yasmin gazed at her daughter's perfect face. The consulting work for Chentech had become steady, providing enough for rent, medical bills, and even some modest savings. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was theirs. In the dim glow of the night light, Yasmin made a solemn promise. "I will build an empire so large that when he sees us again, he will be on his knees." That night, as Yasmin drifted to sleep beside Alexandria's crib, she couldn't know that in a decade, her discovery of a security vulnerability in the Bancroft banking system would be the first step in a revenge she hadn't planned, but that fate would meticulously orchestrate. The weak winter light had faded hours ago as Yasmin carefully placed Alexandria in her crib, the 5-year-old finally succumbing to sleep after insisting she wasn't tired. Motherhood had taught Yasmin patience she never knew she possessed, a quality that served her equally well in coding and in raising a precociously intelligent child. Morning arrived too quickly. Yasmin prepared breakfast in the small kitchen of their modest 2-bedroom apartment, a significant upgrade from the studio they'd occupied during Alexandria's infancy. Fresh fruit, whole grain toast, and yogurt. Simple but nutritious, unlike the protein bars and coffee that had sustained Yasmin through those first desperate months. "Mommy, can I help with the eggs?" Alexandria appeared in the doorway, already dressed in the clothes they'd laid out the night before, her curly hair partially tamed into 2 puffy pigtails. "Of course, sunshine." Yasmin pulled a step stool to the counter. "Remember what I showed you about cracking them?" Alexandria nodded solemnly, her small fingers working with surprising dexterity as she tapped an egg against the bowl's edge. Like this, gentle but firm. While they worked together, Alexandria recited from memory. Encryption uses mathematical algorithms to convert plain text into ciphertext, and only authorized parties with the correct key can decrypt it. Yasmin smiled, wondering what Alexandria's kindergarten teacher thought of a 5-year-old who discussed cryptography instead of cartoons. Very good. And what's the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption? Symmetric uses the same key for encryption and decryption, while asymmetric uses different keys, a public one and a private one. Alexandria beamed, clearly delighted by her mother's approving nod. An hour later, they arrived at the expanded offices of Chentech Solutions. What had begun as a scrappy startup with 3 employees in a converted warehouse space had grown into a respectable firm with 27 staff members and a growing client list of small to mid-sized businesses needing cybersecurity solutions. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," called the receptionist as Yasmin signed both herself and Alexandria into the building. "Thomas asked if you could join the 9:30 call with MediSecure." "I'll be there," Yasmin confirmed, guiding Alexandria toward her office. A real office with a door, not the corner desk she'd started with 3 years ago. Thomas Chen appeared in the hallway, grinning when he spotted Alexandria. "There's my favorite junior security analyst, ready to help us catch some bad guys today." Alexandria giggled. "I brought my special computer," she said, proudly displaying the upgraded version of the small laptop Thomas had given her as a newborn, now customized with programming tools appropriate for her remarkable abilities. "Perfect timing," Thomas replied. "I have some code that needs reviewing by fresh eyes." Yasmin watched their interaction with quiet gratitude. Thomas had become more than an employer. He was Alexandria's uncle figure, the closest thing to extended family they had. When Alexandria's preschool had called her in for a conference about her daughter's concerning behavior of reprogramming the classroom tablets, Thomas had accompanied Yasmin, explaining to the baffled teachers that Alexandria wasn't being destructive but demonstrating extraordinary talent. While Alexandria settled on the colorful mat beneath Yasmin's desk, a space that had evolved from necessity during late work nights to a comfortable office of her own, Yasmin prepared for the client call. MediSecure was their largest client yet, a healthcare data management company serving 3 major hospital networks. The video conference began precisely at 9:30. Yasmin led the presentation, her confidence now fully restored after years of proving herself indispensable to Chentech's success. As she explained the security vulnerabilities her team had identified in MediSecure's system, she noticed Alexandria had stopped coloring and was watching the screen intently. "The token authentication method you're currently using leaves multiple entry points vulnerable," Yasmin explained, sharing her screen to display the code blocks in question. "An attacker could potentially—" "Mommy," Alexandria interrupted in a whisper that wasn't quite quiet enough. "There's another problem there." She pointed toward the screen. The clients' faces registered surprise, some amused, others clearly annoyed by the child's interruption. Yasmin felt a moment of panic, but Thomas smoothly intervened. "Alexandria has a keen eye for patterns," he explained to the clients. "Perhaps we should hear her observation." Swallowing her embarrassment, Yasmin knelt beside her daughter. "What do you see, Alexandria?" The 5-year-old pointed confidently to a section of code Yasmin's team hadn't flagged. "The pattern repeats here, see? If the bad people notice that, they could guess the next numbers." Yasmin examined the code more closely, sudden understanding dawning. Alexandria had identified a predictable pattern in the supposedly random number generation, a subtle but critical flaw that could indeed compromise the entire system. "She's right," Yasmin acknowledged, straightening to address the surprised clients. "There's an additional vulnerability in your random number generator that we hadn't caught. It's creating a predictable pattern that could be exploited." The lead engineer from MediSecure leaned forward. "Your daughter found this?" "She has a unique talent for pattern recognition," Yasmin replied simply. After the call ended successfully, with MediSecure impressed rather than put off by Alexandria's contribution, Thomas stopped by Yasmin's office. "That was remarkable," he said, watching Alexandria, who was now absorbed in a programming puzzle on her laptop. "Have you considered having her formally tested? She's operating at a level far beyond her years." "I'm concerned about labeling her too early," Yasmin admitted. "The world puts enough pressure on children, especially girls in tech." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. But have you considered that with proper resources, she could advance even faster? There are specialized programs for exceptional children." The conversation lingered in Yasmin's mind that evening as she observed Alexandria methodically reorganizing the icons on her tablet according to a complex system she'd created, grouping applications not by category or color as most children might, but by their technical functions and data requirements. "Alexandria," Yasmin asked gently, "are you happy at school? Do you feel challenged enough?" The little girl looked up, her expression surprisingly mature. "The other kids are nice, but they don't understand when I talk about code, and the math is too easy." That night, after Alexandria was asleep, Yasmin researched advanced educational options, the blue light from her laptop illuminating her determined face. The best programs were expensive, far beyond what her salary at Chentech could support, even with her recent promotion to partner status. The following morning, Thomas called Yasmin into his office, closing the door, a rarity that signaled a serious conversation. "I've been approached about selling Chentech," he said without preamble. "A larger security firm wants our client list and proprietary tools." Yasmin felt her stomach drop. "You're selling? What happens to the team? To our clients?" "That depends," Thomas replied. "The offer is generous, but I'm not convinced it's the right move. Which brings me to an alternative I've been considering." He slid a folder across his desk. "Partnership restructuring. Currently you own 15% of Chentech. This would increase your stake to 48%. Yasmin opened the folder with trembling fingers. "Why?" "Because you're the reason we've succeeded," Thomas said simply. "You've transformed this company from a struggling startup into a respected security firm. The choice I'm offering is this. We sell and both walk away with significant money, or we double down, restructure, and build something even bigger." The decision wasn't difficult. That evening, Yasmin signed the partnership agreement, becoming nearly equal partners with the man who had given her a chance when no one else would. 6 months later, the Pentagon called. A sophisticated attack targeting military contractors had been partially successful, and Chentech's reputation for innovative security solutions had reached federal ears. The government contract that followed was transformative, catapulting the small firm into a new league virtually overnight. As Chentech expanded, Alexandria continued to grow both physically and intellectually. Now 6 years old, she frequently accompanied Yasmin to the office, sleeping on the mat under her desk during late-night security emergencies. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but it was their reality. A single mother balancing ambition with the practical demands of parenthood. On Alexandria's 7th birthday, Yasmin splurged on a real celebration, a small party at their apartment with cake from an actual bakery, not the grocery store. While Alexandria entertained her few friends, mostly children of Chentech employees, Yasmin overheard a conversation between two mothers. "It's remarkable how well Alexandria is turning out, considering," one whispered. "Considering what?" asked the other. "You know, being raised by a single mother working those hours. No father in the picture." The words stung, echoing Marcus's cruel assessment years earlier. That night, after the guests had left and Alexandria was in bed surrounded by new books and her first real computer, Yasmin found herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "You'll never be anything but a burden to any man," Marcus had said. The memory still had power to wound, but increasingly, it also fueled her determination. She wasn't just surviving, she was building something meaningful for herself and for Alexandria. The general from the Pentagon called personally when their security system successfully repelled a secondary attack 3 months later. Your team's response was exceptional, Ms. Johnson. We'd like to discuss an expanded role for Chentech in our cybersecurity framework. By Alexandria's 8th birthday, Chentech had 50 employees and offices in Boston and Washington, D.C. Yasmin, now recognized in security circles as an innovative leader, divided her time between client work and developing new security protocols. Alexandria, showing mathematical abilities that qualified as genuinely exceptional, had been accepted to a specialized program for gifted children. The night Alexandria turned 8, she asked the question Yasmin had been anticipating with quiet dread. "Mommy, why doesn't my father ever visit me? Does he know we exist?" They were sitting on Alexandria's bed, surrounded by the gifts from her modest birthday celebration. Yasmin took a deep breath, having rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind. "He made choices based on what he valued most," she explained carefully. "And unfortunately, we weren't what he valued." Alexandria considered this with the same analytical focus she applied to coding problems. "Did he see my face? Did he hold me?" "No, sweetheart. He knew I was pregnant, but he chose a different path before you were born." Alexandria nodded slowly. "Is that why we had to start over? Why we were poor before Chentech?" "Yes," Yasmin admitted, "but look at what we've built together. Look at how far we've come." That night after Alexandria slept, Yasmin's tablet notification showed a news alert that made her blood freeze. Marcus Reynolds had been named Chief of Digital Strategy for the Republican National Committee, his expertise in information security highlighted as crucial for upcoming elections, an irony that only fate could orchestrate so perfectly. Yasmin sat frozen before her tablet, the news about Marcus Reynolds burning into her retinas. The irony was almost too perfect. The man who had dismissed her technical abilities as hobbies without a future was now lauded for his supposed expertise in information security. She closed the browser, unwilling to let his image linger in her home. 3 years later, that memory seemed to belong to another lifetime. The Obsidian Tech Solutions headquarters buzzed with activity as Yasmin strode through the main development floor. 53 employees now occupied the space that had begun with just 3 desks in a converted warehouse. The company logo, a sleek black phoenix rising from stylized code, adorned the glass entrance doors and the feature wall behind reception. "The Pentagon called again." Rebecca, her executive assistant, fell into step beside her. "General Matheson wants to move your briefing to 3 o'clock instead of 5. Yasmin nodded, checking her watch. "That works. Where's Alexandria?" "In the testing lab with Sanjay. They're running simulations on the new hospital firewall." At 8 years old, Alexandria had become a fixture at Obsidian, her remarkable abilities now accepted as part of the company's unique culture. The decision to launch her own firm had been the most terrifying and exhilarating choice of Yasmin's life. After 5 successful years at Chentech, the moment had come when her vision exceeded what the partnership could contain. Thomas had understood. "You've outgrown us," he'd said simply when she broached the subject of leaving. "I always knew you would." She'd mortgaged everything to secure the initial funding, the small apartment, her modest savings, even selling her mother's jewelry that had been her only inheritance. Alexandria had watched solemnly as Yasmin signed the bank papers. "What are you doing, Mommy?" she had asked, her intelligent eyes serious. "Betting on us, Alexandria," Yasmin had replied. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to build something that no one can take from you." Those words had proven prophetic. Within 18 months, Obsidian had secured its first government contract, a modest project securing veterans' health records. 6 months after that, they'd identified and neutralized a sophisticated attack on a military contractor's infrastructure, earning Obsidian a reputation for innovative solutions to emerging threats. Now, 3 years after founding, the company occupied 2 floors of a Cambridge office building, with a satellite office recently opened in Washington, D.C. Their client list included 3 federal agencies, 6 major hospital networks, and a growing number of financial institutions seeking protection from increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks. Yasmin found Alexandria in the testing lab, her small figure perched on a chair too large for her, eyes fixed intently on a monitor where lines of code scrolled past. At 11, she still had the round cheeks of childhood, but her expressions carried a maturity that sometimes startled even Yasmin. "Mom, look at this," Alexandria called, not turning from the screen. "I think I found a way to improve the intrusion detection by 13% without adding processing overhead." Sanjay, Obsidian's lead developer, nodded in confirmation. "She's right. We've tested it 3 times. Yasmin leaned over her daughter's shoulder, scanning the elegant solution with professional pride. "That's brilliant, Alexandria. Let's implement it in the next build." Alexandria beamed, soaking in the approval not as a child seeking parental validation, but as a contributor being recognized for genuine accomplishment. Later that evening, as they shared dinner in Yasmin's office, a routine developed during crunch periods when leaving at a reasonable hour wasn't possible, Alexandria asked the question that had been percolating. "Mom, why don't you ever date anyone?" Yasmin nearly choked on her noodles. "Where did that come from?" Alexandria shrugged with the calculated casualness of pre-adolescence. "Sanjay asked Natalie from accounting out today. It made me realize I've never seen you with anyone." Yasmin considered her response carefully. "Building Obsidian has been my priority, and raising you, of course." "But don't you get lonely?" Alexandria pressed, her perception uncomfortably acute. The truth was more complicated than Yasmin cared to admit. There had been a few attempts at relationships over the years: a software developer she'd met at a conference, a client who'd asked her to dinner after a successful project completion, even a single father from Alexandria's school. None had progressed beyond a few dates. "I have you," Yasmin finally answered. "I built all this for us. I'm never really alone." Alexandria seemed to accept this, returning to her food, but Yasmin saw the questions lingering behind her eyes. Questions about belonging, about family structures, about the father who remained an abstract concept rather than a real person in her life. The Pentagon briefing the following day marked a turning point for Obsidian. What began as a routine security assessment escalated dramatically when Yasmin's team identified the fingerprints of a sophisticated Russian operation attempting to breach military communications. For 72 hours, Obsidian's core team worked without breaks, tracing the attack vectors and establishing countermeasures. Alexandria refused to go to her after-school program, instead camping out on the couch in Yasmin's office, occasionally offering insights that the exhausted adults might have missed. When the attack was finally neutralized, the Secretary of Defense himself joined the video conference to thank them. "Ms. Johnson, your team has potentially prevented a catastrophic breach of national security," he said gravely. "We'll be in touch about expanding our relationship with Obsidian." The Washington Post broke the story the following week. Female-led security firm thwarts Russian cyber attack. Overnight, Obsidian transformed from a respected boutique security company to a national name. Yasmin's phone rang constantly with interview requests, potential clients, and investment offers. The move to expanded offices happened with dizzying speed. The new headquarters in Cambridge featured state-of-the-art facilities, dedicated research labs, and a special workspace designed for Alexandria, acknowledgement that the youngest Johnson was as integral to Obsidian's success as its founder. Alexandria's school called 3 days after they moved into the new space. "Ms. Johnson, we need to discuss Alexandria's recent behavior," the principal began carefully. "What's happened?" Yasmin asked, tension immediately rising. "She's not in trouble exactly," the principal clarified, "but she's hacked into the school's grading system." "Hacked?" Yasmin echoed, professional concern warring with maternal pride. "Not to change grades," the principal hurried to add. She left a detailed security report in the administrator's email outlining 12 vulnerabilities and how to fix them. She even included that she was ethically obligated to report weaknesses rather than exploit them. That evening, Yasmin had a long talk with Alexandria about appropriate channels for security disclosures, fighting to keep her expression serious while inwardly bursting with pride at her daughter's ethical approach. Alexandria listened attentively before asking, "Is that how you started? Finding problems and fixing them?" "Something like that," Yasmin admitted, thinking back to that late night in the community computer lab that had changed their trajectory. The following month brought Yasmin's first television interview, a national business program that wanted to profile the woman protecting America's digital infrastructure. She spent hours preparing, acutely aware that this public exposure would permanently alter their privacy. The interview began smoothly enough with questions about Obsidian's growth and technical capabilities. Then came the pivot she'd been dreading. As a single mother leading a company of this caliber, how do you balance work and family responsibilities? The interviewer asked, his tone suggesting he'd identified a weakness. Yasmin smiled, her expression practiced, but her eyes flashing. "I reject the premise of your question. Being a mother doesn't detract from my professional capabilities. It enhances them. The same determination that drives me to protect my daughter drives Obsidian's mission to protect our clients." The clip went viral, shared by women in tech as a masterclass in redirecting sexist questioning. Requests for speaking engagements flooded in, and a prominent business magazine requested a profile. Alexandria watched the interview at home, her expression unreadable. "You didn't mention my father," she observed afterward. "No," Yasmin agreed. "His absence isn't relevant to our story." Alexandria considered this. "Sometimes I wonder what he was like, if I look like him at all." The question pierced Yasmin's carefully constructed narrative. How much should she reveal? How much hurt would the truth cause? "You have his analytical mind," she admitted finally, "and something in your profile, the way you hold your head when you're thinking." Alexandria absorbed this rare information about her origins, filing it away like data points in an ongoing investigation. As Obsidian expanded to 500 employees with offices in 3 cities, Yasmin could afford to provide Alexandria with every advantage. They moved from their modest apartment to a beautiful brownstone in Cambridge. Alexandria attended an exclusive private school with advanced STEM programming, though she still spent most afternoons at Obsidian headquarters, where even senior engineers had learned to take her suggestions seriously. On Alexandria's 13th birthday, after a small celebration at their home, she approached Yasmin with unusual hesitation. "Mom, I found something when I was looking for the old photos for my history project." She held out a worn folder. "It's about him, isn't it? Senator Reynolds." Yasmin felt the blood drain from her face. The folder contained news clippings she'd saved over the years, articles tracking Marcus's political rise, including his recent election to the Senate. She hadn't looked at them in years, but couldn't bring herself to discard them either. "Yes," she acknowledged, seeing no point in denial. "That's your father. Why do you keep articles about him if he abandoned us?" Alexandria's voice held more curiosity than accusation. Yasmin considered her answer carefully. "To never forget that someone can appear perfect and be completely hollow inside, and to remember how much we've accomplished without him." Alexandria's eyes, so like her own, filled with unexpected emotion. "Sometimes I wish I had a father, even if it wasn't him, someone who would be there when you can't be." The words struck Yasmin with physical force. Despite all she'd built, all she'd sacrificed, her daughter still felt the absence of what they didn't have. "He said we would be a burden, Alexandria," she said softly. "Every achievement of yours, every day of our life is proof of how wrong he was." That night, after Alexandria finally slept, Yasmin checked the news on her tablet. A headline immediately caught her attention. "Senator Marcus Reynolds announces Presidential Exploratory Committee." The accompanying photo showed Marcus at a podium, Rebecca Bancroft Reynolds by his side, his expression radiating confidence as he spoke about his unwavering family values, not knowing that in less than a year he would stand face to face with the living legacy he had discarded. Yasmin closed the news tab displaying Marcus's presidential ambitions, a strange emptiness replacing the anger she once felt. 5 years ago, such news might have consumed her thoughts for days. Now it registered as little more than an inconvenient data point. The man who had abandoned them was climbing higher, his political star rising on the foundation of family values he'd so easily discarded. The Obsidian Tech Solutions headquarters now occupied an entire building in downtown Boston, the sleek obsidian and glass structure housing over 1,500 employees. What had begun as a desperate gamble had transformed into a cybersecurity powerhouse valued at nearly $2 billion in the latest funding round. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Yasmin's corner office as she reviewed quarterly projections on multiple monitors. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, expecting her executive assistant with the morning briefing documents. Instead, Alexandria entered, dressed in the uniform of her elite private school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. At 13, she carried herself with a self-possession that sometimes made Yasmin forget how young she still was. "I thought you'd already left for school," Yasmin said, checking her watch. "I wanted to show you something first." Alexandria placed her tablet on the desk, displaying complex lines of code. "I finished the algorithm we discussed last night. It increases efficiency by 37%. Yasmin studied the code, professionally impressed beyond maternal pride. "This is exceptional work, Alexandria. Have you tested it against the benchmark scenarios?" "All 12 scenarios, with consistent results." Alexandria's smile held the quiet confidence of someone who knew their worth. "I thought we could implement it in the Pentagon firewall upgrade." "We certainly will." Yasmin made a note to share the innovation with her development team. "Does your math teacher know you're doing differential calculus in your spare time instead of algebra?" Alexandria rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Mr. Peterson still thinks I need help with polynomials. It's easier not to correct him." After Alexandria left for school, Yasmin's executive assistant entered with the day's schedule. "The New York Times interview is confirmed for 2 o'clock, she reported. "Forbes wants to schedule a photo shoot for next week's cover, and the White House Office of Science and Technology has requested a consultation on Thursday." Yasmin nodded, making mental notes. "And the MIT recruitment event?" "Set for 5:30. Your speech is loaded on the teleprompter, and Alexandria will meet you there directly from her coding club." The pace of Yasmin's days had become relentless, a perpetual cycle of high-stakes meetings, strategic decisions, and public appearances. The transformation from desperate single mother to tech CEO had been so complete that sometimes she barely recognized her former self in memories. The woman serving coffee, the exhausted telemarketer counting coins for prenatal vitamins. That evening, as Yasmin delivered her speech to MIT's brightest computer science graduates, she spotted Alexandria in the front row, watching with analytical intensity. Her daughter now attended recruitment events not just as Yasmin's child, but as Obsidian's youngest talent scout, with an uncanny ability to identify promising engineers. The security challenges of tomorrow require not just technical expertise but moral courage, Yasmin told the audience. At Obsidian, we believe that protecting digital infrastructure is ultimately about protecting people, their privacy, their safety, their freedom. After fielding questions from eager students, Yasmin found Alexandria speaking animatedly with a nervous-looking young woman. "Mom, this is Priya," Alexandria introduced. "She's developed a quantum-resistant encryption method that solves the lattice problem we've been working on." Yasmin extended her hand to the stunned graduate student. "We'd love to see your research, Priya. My team will be in touch tomorrow." Later that night, in the back of the company car taking them home, Alexandria grew uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything all right?" Yasmin asked, recognizing the pensive expression that typically preceded difficult questions. I got accepted to the Harvard summer program, Alexandria said, staring out at the Boston skyline, the advanced computing research track. Pride surged through Yasmin. That's incredible. They rarely accept anyone under 16. I'd be the youngest ever admitted, Alexandria confirmed, still not meeting her mother's eyes. But I'd have to live in the dorms for 8 weeks. The implication hung between them. In 13 years, they had never been separated for more than a few days. Of course you should go, Yasmin said firmly, pushing down her own anxiety. This is an extraordinary opportunity. Alexandria finally turned to her. You won't be alone? You'll be okay? The role reversal struck Yasmin with unexpected force, her daughter worrying about her loneliness rather than the other way around. I have 3 executive meetings, 2 international client consultations, and a Pentagon briefing next week alone, Yasmin assured her with a smile. I'll hardly have time to notice the quiet. It was a lie, of course. The brownstone would feel cavernous without Alexandria's presence, without their evening discussions of quantum computing over dinner or the sound of her typing late into the night. The summer brought changes beyond Alexandria's temporary absence. Obsidian expanded its international presence with offices in London and Singapore. Yasmin found herself traveling more frequently, speaking at global security conferences and meeting with government officials concerned about escalating cyber threats. During a rare weekend at home, Yasmin accepted a dinner invitation from Jonathan Chen, Thomas's younger brother and Obsidian's legal counsel. The evening began as a business discussion but gradually shifted into something more personal. You've built something remarkable, Jonathan said as they shared dessert at an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor. Few people could have accomplished what you have, especially starting from where you did. Yasmin felt an unfamiliar warmth at the genuine admiration in his eyes. I had excellent help along the way. Your brother saw potential in me when no one else would. Thomas has always been good at spotting talent, Jonathan agreed, but nurturing it into what you've become, that was all you. The evening ended with a tentative plan for another dinner the following weekend. As Jonathan helped her into a taxi, Yasmin felt a flutter of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. 3 days later, Alexandria called from Harvard, her excitement palpable even through the video screen. I've been invited to present my research at the International Cryptography Conference in Geneva. Professor Hawkins says my work on quantum-resistant algorithms is groundbreaking. That's extraordinary, Yasmin beamed, making mental notes to rearrange her schedule to accompany Alexandria to Switzerland. I'm so proud of you. Alexandria's expression shifted to something more hesitant. There's something else. I've been offered early admission to Harvard's computer science program. I could start in January. Yasmin blinked, processing the implications. You'd be 14, Alexandria confirmed. The youngest undergraduate admission in the department's history. That night, alone in her home office, Yasmin stared at Alexandria's framed school photos arranged chronologically on her desk, from kindergarten to her current middle school portrait. Her daughter was growing up at an accelerated pace, her brilliant mind propelling her into opportunities and experiences far beyond her years. The promised second dinner with Jonathan never materialized. A major breach at a defense contractor required Yasmin's full attention for 12 consecutive days, during which she slept on the office couch and subsisted on delivered meals. By the time the crisis passed, the tentative connection had faded, Jonathan understanding without resentment that Yasmin's life left little room for personal relationships. When Alexandria returned from the summer program, noticeably taller and more confident, Yasmin realized how quickly time was passing. Her daughter was transforming from child to young woman before her eyes, her features maturing into a striking blend of Yasmin's warmth and Marcus's angular precision. I missed you, Yasmin admitted as they settled back into their evening routine, Alexandria unpacking the multiple academic honors she'd collected over the summer. I missed you too, Alexandria replied, then hesitated before asking, Did you ever try dating again? While I was gone? Yasmin thought briefly of Jonathan and the possibility that had withered under the demands of her career. There was a possibility. It didn't work out. Alexandria studied her mother with unsettling perception. You don't feel like you need someone? You're not lonely? The question echoed their conversation from months earlier, but now carried the weight of Alexandria's expanding independence. I have you. I have Obsidian. I built all of this. Yasmin gestured to encompass their beautiful home, the company, their life. That doesn't leave much room for anything else. Alexandria's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Mom, I've been thinking about my father, about Senator Reynolds. The name still had the power to make Yasmin's stomach tighten. What about him? I've been researching him, Alexandria admitted. His voting record, his committee assignments, his public statements. Yasmin nodded, unsurprised. Of course, Alexandria would investigate, analyze, collect data points. It was how she approached every unknown. And what have you learned? Yasmin asked carefully. He chairs the cybersecurity subcommittee, Alexandria said, watching her mother's reaction. The one that oversees the contracts Obsidian bids on. The irony wasn't lost on Yasmin. Marcus now wielded influence over the very industry where she had built her success, the field he had once dismissed as her hobby without a future. That night, after Alexandria went to bed, Yasmin found herself drawn to her home office, opening a drawer she rarely accessed. Inside lay the folder Alexandria had discovered months earlier, the collection of articles tracking Marcus's rise through Republican politics. She hadn't added to it in years, but now found herself searching online for recent information. Senator Marcus Reynolds smiled confidently from his official website, his biography highlighting his commitment to traditional values and his 15-year marriage to Rebecca Bancroft Reynolds. No children were mentioned. It was as if that chapter of his life had never existed. The following morning, while searching for an old document in her study, Alexandria accidentally knocked over a storage box in the closet. As she gathered the spilled contents, a small envelope caught her attention. Inside, she found newspaper clippings about Marcus Reynolds, dozens of them, spanning 15 years, methodically collected and dated. Some were highlighted, others annotated in her mother's precise handwriting. Campaign announcements, committee appointments, policy positions, a comprehensive record of the man who had abandoned them before Alexandria was born. When Yasmin returned home that evening, she found Alexandria sitting on the living room sofa, the articles spread across the coffee table. "Why do you keep all these?" Alexandria asked without preamble. "Why track him so closely if he means nothing to us?" Yasmin set down her briefcase, choosing her words carefully. To never forget that someone can appear perfect and be completely hollow inside, and to remember how much we've accomplished without him. Alexandria's eyes, so analytical and perceptive, filled with unexpected emotion. "Sometimes I wish I had a father, even if it wasn't him. Someone who would be there when you can't be." The words struck Yasmin with physical force. Despite all she'd built, all she'd sacrificed, her daughter still felt the absence of what they didn't have. "He said we would be a burden, Alexandria," she said softly. "Every achievement of yours, every day of our life is proof of how wrong he was." That night, after Alexandria finally slept, Yasmin checked the news on her tablet. A headline immediately caught her attention. "Senator Marcus Reynolds announces Presidential Exploratory Committee." The accompanying photo showed Marcus at a podium, Rebecca Bancroft Reynolds by his side, his expression radiating confidence as he spoke about his unwavering family values, not knowing that in less than a year he would stand face to face with the living legacy he had discarded. The news of Senator Marcus Reynolds' presidential aspirations faded from Yasmin's tablet screen, but its implications lingered in her mind like a shadow. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply to center herself. The moment when their paths would cross again had always been inevitable. Washington was indeed a small world at the highest levels of power and influence. 6 months later, Yasmin's prediction materialized in the form of an invitation that her executive assistant placed on her desk with particular emphasis. The National Technological Security Conference has requested you as their keynote speaker, Rebecca said, her tone suggesting this wasn't routine. It's in Washington next month. 3 days, all major government agencies and private sector leaders will attend. Yasmin scanned the formal invitation, noting the prestigious venue and comprehensive agenda. Who else is speaking? The Secretary of Defense, 2 agency directors, and… Rebecca hesitated fractionally. Senator Marcus Reynolds will be leading a panel on legislative approaches to cybersecurity threats. The name hung in the air between them. Rebecca, who had been with Yasmin for nearly a decade, was one of the few people who knew the full history. I see, Yasmin said neutrally, setting the invitation aside. Send our standard acceptance, and arrange for the jet rather than commercial. I want flexibility with our schedule. That evening, as Yasmin reviewed security protocols for the upcoming conference in her home office, the front door opened and closed with Alexandria's distinctive rhythm. 2 quick steps, a pause to set down her backpack, then 3 more steps toward whatever had captured her interest. "Mom?" Alexandria called, her voice echoing through their Cambridge brownstone. "Did you see the email from Harvard?" Yasmin emerged from her office to find her daughter, now 14 and already accepted to Harvard with a full scholarship, practically vibrating with excitement. "What email?" Yasmin asked, though she already suspected the content. "They've approved my advanced placement. I'll be starting with sophomore-level courses in quantum computing and advanced cryptography," Alexandria explained, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I'll be the youngest student ever admitted to their computer science program." Yasmin embraced her daughter, pride momentarily overwhelming the bittersweet awareness of how quickly their life together was changing. "That's extraordinary, Alexandria. You've earned every bit of this opportunity." Later that night, after dinner filled with animated discussion of quantum encryption methods, Alexandria noticed the conference materials spread across Yasmin's desk. "The National Tech Security Conference?" she asked, picking up the glossy program. "Are you speaking?" "Keynote address," Yasmin confirmed. Alexandria flipped through the program, her expression shifting subtly as she reached a particular page. "Senator Reynolds is presenting." It wasn't a question, but Yasmin answered anyway. "Yes, he chairs the Senate Cybersecurity Subcommittee now." Alexandria set the program down carefully, her movements deliberately controlled. "I'd like to come with you." Yasmin studied her daughter's face, searching for the motivation behind the request. "You'd miss 3 days of your advanced programming seminar." "I'm ahead of the curriculum anyway," Alexandria replied with the casual confidence that characterized her approach to academics. "Besides, I should start attending these events if I'm going to be working with government contracts eventually." The practical reasoning was impeccable, but Yasmin recognized the underlying current. "Alexandria, is this about seeing him?" Her daughter met her gaze directly. "Isn't it time? I'm starting Harvard in 2 months. I've developed algorithms being used by the Pentagon. I should know where I come from, who I come from, before I move into the next phase of my life." Yasmin couldn't argue with the logic, though her protective instincts screamed caution. "If we see him there, it will be in a professional context. We won't seek him out." Alexandria nodded solemnly. "Of course, we're attending as Obsidian representatives, not as whatever we are to him." The preparations for the conference intensified over the following weeks. Obsidian had been contracted to handle the event's cybersecurity, adding another layer of complexity to their involvement. Yasmin's team established advanced protocols, creating secure networks and implementing cutting-edge threat detection systems throughout the venue. The morning of their departure, Yasmin found Alexandria in her bedroom, scrutinizing her reflection in the full-length mirror. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit that made her look older than her 14 years, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun that emphasized her striking features that Yasmin had to admit increasingly resembled Marcus's. You look very professional, Yasmin said, leaning against the doorframe. Alexandria turned, her expression serious. I want to be taken seriously, not as your daughter, but as a contributor in my own right. The Obsidian corporate jet departed Boston at precisely 10 o'clock that morning, Yasmin using the 3-hour flight to refine her keynote address while Alexandria suggested technical improvements to her slides. You should emphasize the quantum vulnerability more prominently, Alexandria noted, pointing to a section of the presentation. Most government systems are still using outdated encryption that will be obsolete once quantum computing reaches maturity. Yasmin incorporated the suggestion, marveling at how their relationship had evolved, no longer simply mother and daughter, but increasingly colleagues with complementary expertise. The Four Seasons Washington welcomed them with the deferential efficiency reserved for high-profile guests. As they checked in, Yasmin noticed several conference attendees in the lobby doing double-takes upon recognizing her. Ms. Johnson, welcome. The hotel manager greeted them personally. Your team arrived yesterday and has already secured the premises. The presidential suite is prepared as requested. Their suite occupied the top floor, offering panoramic views of the Capitol. Alexandria immediately claimed the smaller bedroom, unpacking her laptop and setting up a workstation before they'd been there 10 minutes. Yasmin's phone chimed with a notification from her security team. The pre-conference briefing is starting in 30 minutes in the Monroe Room. Will you join me? Alexandria nodded, already absorbed in reviewing the event's network architecture on her tablet. I found 3 potential vulnerabilities in their original setup. I want to make sure our team addressed them properly. The Monroe Room buzzed with activity when they arrived. 30 Obsidian security specialists establishing command centers, testing communications, and finalizing protocols. Heads turned respectfully as Yasmin entered, the team lead approaching immediately. Everything is on schedule, Ms. Johnson, he reported. We've implemented the enhanced quantum-resistant protocols Alexandria designed, and we're running continuous penetration tests against our own systems. Excellent, Yasmin acknowledged. What's our staff coverage for the main events? 4 specialists per entrance, facial recognition active throughout public spaces, and continuous monitoring of all network traffic, he detailed. We're also providing personal security for key speakers, including you. Yasmin raised an eyebrow. Is that necessary? Standard protocol for events of this security level, he explained, especially with the high-profile attendees confirmed. 6 senators, the Secretary of Defense, 3 agency directors, and over 20 corporate CEOs. The evening before the conference officially began, Yasmin and Alexandria attended a private reception for speakers and major sponsors. Dressed in an elegant black evening suit that emphasized her commanding presence, Yasmin navigated the room with practiced ease, Alexandria remaining close by her side. Yasmin Johnson, a deep voice interrupted their conversation with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Your reputation precedes you. Yasmin turned to find General Matheson, one of the Pentagon's senior cybersecurity officials and a longtime Obsidian client. General, a pleasure to see you outside of crisis briefings, she greeted him warmly before introducing Alexandria. This is my daughter, Alexandria. She designed the quantum-resistant authentication protocol your team implemented last quarter. The general's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise as he reassessed the teenager before him. That was your work? Our analysts called it revolutionary. Alexandria accepted the compliment with quiet confidence. It's simply an application of lattice-based cryptography with a modified approach to key distribution. As they continued circulating through the reception, Yasmin noted Alexandria subtly scanning each new group they approached, her eyes assessing and calculating. She was looking for him, Yasmin realized, preparing herself for the inevitable encounter. It didn't come that evening. Marcus Reynolds' name appeared on several attendee lists, but he remained absent from the reception, his staff citing schedule conflicts. The following morning dawned bright and clear, Washington's spring weather cooperating perfectly with the prestigious event. Yasmin reviewed her keynote speech one final time in their suite while Alexandria monitored the conference security feeds on her laptop. "Attendance is exceeding projections," Alexandria noted. "The main hall is already at 87% capacity, and your session doesn't start for another hour." Yasmin nodded, making a final adjustment to her appearance, a subtle application of lipstick that completed her commanding professional image. Her tailored charcoal suit with crimson accents projected precisely the impression she intended: authoritative, innovative, unstoppable. "The car is waiting," Alexandria announced, closing her laptop and gathering her own materials. "Your security detail just checked in." As their vehicle approached the convention center, Yasmin observed the scale of the event: security checkpoints, media vans, and a steady stream of distinguished attendees filing through the main entrance. The Obsidian logo featured prominently on security badges and digital displays throughout the venue. Backstage in the green room, Yasmin received last-minute briefings while Alexandria connected with the security team, verifying systems were functioning optimally. Through the monitor, they could see the massive auditorium filling to capacity. "Final attendance count is 527, an assistant informed them, including all confirmed VIPs. Senator Reynolds arrived 10 minutes ago with Mrs. Reynolds and 2 major campaign donors. Alexandria's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly at the name, but her expression remained carefully neutral. "Where is he seated?" she asked, her tone casual. "Third row center according to the seating chart," the assistant replied, oblivious to the significance. 5 minutes before Yasmin was scheduled to take the stage, Alexandria approached her mother in a quiet corner of the preparation area. "Are you ready?" Yasmin asked, assuming her daughter's concern was for the presentation. "I looked at the audience feed," Alexandria said quietly. "He's there, exactly where they said. Third row center, with a blonde woman beside him. He looks older than his photos." The simple observation carried undercurrents of emotions too complex to unpack in the moments before Yasmin's keynote. She placed her hands on Alexandria's shoulders, meeting her eyes directly. "Remember who we are," she said firmly. "Everything we've built, everything we've overcome. He doesn't define us. We defined ourselves long ago." Alexandria nodded, straightening her shoulders with renewed determination. "I'll be in the front row, where he can see exactly who we've become without him." The introduction began, the conference director extolling Yasmin's accomplishments to the assembled dignitaries. As Yasmin prepared to take the stage, she glanced at the monitor showing the audience. There in the third row sat Marcus Reynolds, older, grayer, but unmistakable. Beside him, Rebecca Bancroft Reynolds maintained the polished appearance of a political spouse, her attention focused on the stage. Neither of them had any idea that their carefully constructed world was about to collide with the past Marcus had so callously discarded. As Yasmin strode confidently toward the podium, applause thundering through the hall, Marcus Reynolds, seated in the third row with eyes fixed on his program, was about to have the color drained from his face upon finally making the connection that would forever alter the course of his ambitious presidential campaign. Yasmin's confident strides carried her toward the podium as applause thundered through the auditorium. The spotlights cast her in a commanding glow, her tailored suit emphasizing the power she had worked so meticulously to build. Each step forward was another moment closer to the inevitable collision of past and present. In the third row, Marcus Reynolds glanced down at his program, studying the speaker's credentials with professional interest. Obsidian Tech Solutions, a name that had become inescapable in security circles. The company had risen meteorically, securing contracts his own cybersecurity subcommittee oversaw. He'd skimmed briefings mentioning the founder, but names rarely stuck in his politically calibrated mind unless attached to donors or opponents. "Good morning?" Yasmin's voice resonated through the hall with practiced authority. "Today we stand at the precipice of a new era in cybersecurity threats." The familiar cadence sent an electric jolt through Marcus's body. His head snapped up, eyes widening as they fixed on the woman commanding the stage. Recognition dawned slowly, disbelief battling certainty as his brain processed the evidence before him. The confident CEO with immaculate posture and penetrating gaze bore little resemblance to the devastated young woman he'd discarded 15 years ago, yet it was undeniably her, Yasmin Johnson. The name he'd pushed to the furthest recesses of his mind now blazed across the massive screen behind her. The vulnerabilities we face today are not merely technical problems, Yasmin continued, her presentation flowing seamlessly despite having spotted Marcus's recognition. They represent existential threats to our infrastructure, our economy, and our national security. Rebecca leaned toward Marcus, whispering, "Are you feeling all right? You've gone pale." Marcus couldn't answer, his throat constricting as his gaze drifted to the front row. There sat a teenage girl with an intensity of focus that mirrored his own, her features a haunting blend of familiar elements. Yasmin's warm complexion and expressive eyes combined with his own angular jawline and calculating gaze. The timing matched perfectly. The math was undeniable. This poised young woman in the front row, her fingers occasionally typing notes on a sleek tablet, was the child he had dismissed as a career liability, the black child who would ruin his political future. The irony crashed over him like Arctic water. The pregnancy he'd fled from had produced not the burden he'd feared, but this self-possessed young woman whose very existence now threatened everything he'd built in her absence. Our traditional approaches to security have become outdated, Yasmin's voice cut through his panic. We cannot defend tomorrow's systems with yesterday's thinking. The professional donors flanking Marcus shifted in their seats, clearly impressed by the commanding presence on stage. One leaned over to whisper, "Remarkable woman. We should get her on board as a technical advisor for your campaign." Rebecca nodded in agreement, completely unaware of the bomb ticking beside her. "She'd add credibility to your cybersecurity platform." Marcus felt sweat beading along his hairline despite the auditorium's careful climate control. Each confident gesture Yasmin made, each articulate point she delivered, hammered home the magnitude of his miscalculation 15 years ago. The woman he had deemed never anything but a burden now commanded the rapt attention of Washington's power brokers. For 45 minutes, Marcus endured his private hell, unable to leave without drawing attention, forced to witness Yasmin's undeniable expertise and authority. When she concluded to thunderous applause, he remained frozen in his seat while others rose in standing ovation. "Are you sure you're all right?" Rebecca pressed, concern creasing her perfectly maintained features. "You haven't said a word for the entire presentation." "Just taking mental notes," he managed, his political training providing the automatic response while his mind raced through damage control scenarios. The networking reception that followed was Marcus's personal nightmare made manifest. He maneuvered through the crowded hall, accepting congratulations on his presidential exploratory committee while constantly scanning for Yasmin and the girl, his daughter, trying desperately to avoid an encounter. "Senator Reynolds," called a fellow committee member, "you must meet Yasmin Johnson. Her insights on quantum vulnerabilities directly relate to the legislation you're drafting." Marcus fabricated an urgent call, retreating to a quieter corner where he could observe from a distance. Yasmin moved through the crowd with effortless grace, senior military officials and tech executives gravitating toward her like satellites to a star. The teenager remained close by her side, occasionally contributing points that made experienced government officials nod with respect. "Impressive family," noted a senior senator who had materialized beside Marcus. "The daughter's some kind of prodigy, I hear. Already accepted to Harvard at 14. Reminds me of you, actually. That same analytical intensity." Marcus forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Remarkable indeed." The reception stretched interminably, Marcus deploying every political evasion tactic he'd perfected over decades of campaigning. He scheduled his panel discussion for the following day, calculating it would give him time to prepare for the inevitable confrontation, or perhaps even depart Washington with a convenient emergency. Providence granted no such mercy. As Marcus engaged a prominent defense contractor whose support could significantly boost his campaign finances, he felt a presence behind him that raised the hairs on his neck. "Senator Reynolds," came Yasmin's voice, measured and controlled. What a remarkable coincidence. Marcus turned slowly, political training taking over as he composed his features into a mask of polite interest. Yasmin stood before him, 15 years of success evident in every aspect of her bearing. Gone was the vulnerable young woman he'd dismissed. In her place stood someone who commanded respect without effort. Beside her stood Alexandria, studying him with clinical detachment, as though he were a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "Ms. Johnson," he managed, extending his hand automatically. "Your presentation was impressive." Yasmin accepted the handshake with cool professionalism, the brief contact feeling like an electrical current. "I believe you've never met Alexandria, the daughter you decided wasn't worthy of your surname." The words landed with surgical precision, quiet enough to maintain public decorum yet clear enough to demolish his composure. Alexandria's eyes, so like his own, assessed him without emotion. "Your work on the Cybersecurity Committee is fundamentally flawed, Senator," she stated flatly. "Your proposals demonstrate a rudimentary understanding of Level 4 threats at best." The clinical evaluation, delivered in the tone of a professor addressing a mediocre student, struck Marcus more powerfully than any emotional accusation could have. This child, his child, had just dismantled his professional credibility in a single sentence. Marcus struggled to formulate a response when he noticed Rebecca approaching, her social radar having detected a potentially important connection. "Darling, aren't you going to introduce me?" she asked, sliding her arm through his with practiced ease. The blood drained from Marcus's face as he realized the collision that was about to occur. 15 years of careful omission and outright lies were seconds from exposure. "Rebecca," Yasmin acknowledged with a cordial smile that never reached her eyes. "You must be the more suitable replacement Marcus found. Fascinating to finally meet you." Rebecca's perfectly maintained expression faltered, confusion evident as she processed Yasmin's words. "I'm sorry. Have we been introduced before?" "Not formally," Yasmin replied. "Though I suppose I should thank you for taking my place when Marcus decided a pregnant black girlfriend would damage his political prospects." Understanding crashed across Rebecca's features like a physical blow. Her eyes darted between Marcus and Alexandria, the teenager's features suddenly revealing their paternity with unmistakable clarity. "What is she talking about?" Rebecca demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Marcus could respond, he noticed 2 Washington Post journalists had drifted within earshot, their professional interest clearly piqued by the tension radiating from their small group. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Marcus suggested, desperation leaking through his political veneer. "I've always wondered what would happen when we met again," Yasmin continued, her voice calm but audible to those nearby. "You said I would never be anything but a burden, Marcus, that a black child would ruin your political future." She gestured toward Alexandria. "Ironic that Alexandria just secured a cybersecurity contract with the Pentagon larger than your entire senatorial office's annual budget." The words hung in the air like precision-guided missiles. Marcus watched in horror as one of the journalists discreetly activated a recording device. "Yasmin, we should discuss this in private," he attempted, reaching for control of a situation rapidly spiraling beyond salvage. "There's nothing to discuss in private," Yasmin interrupted, her composure absolute. "I built a technological empire while you built lies, and the supreme irony is that our daughter, whom you rejected because you feared she would ruin your career, now has enough influence to destroy it with a few well-placed words or a few lines of code if she were interested enough in you to bother." Rebecca's face had transformed into a mask of horrified comprehension as the pieces fell into place. The timing of their relationship, the absence of children in their marriage despite years of trying, the sudden emergence of this poised teenager with Marcus's distinctive features. 15 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. You've been lying to me for 15 years? Alexandria observed the unfolding drama with the detached interest of a scientist noting reactions in an experiment. Your encryption standards in the recent cybersecurity bill were obsolete before you proposed them, Senator, she commented, as though continuing a purely professional critique. Perhaps if you'd consulted actual experts instead of lobbyists, you wouldn't have embarrassed yourself so thoroughly in the technical community. The clinical assessment, delivered with such casual confidence, completed Marcus's professional evisceration. The defense contractor, who had been considering a significant campaign contribution, stepped back subtly, creating distance from what was clearly becoming a political liability. "If you'll excuse us," Yasmin said with the practiced smile of a CEO concluding an unproductive meeting, "Alexandria and I have a working dinner with the Secretary of Defense to discuss quantum encryption protocols." As they turned to leave, Alexandria fixed Marcus with a final evaluating gaze. "Your facial structure demonstrates fascinating hereditary patterns, Senator Reynolds. Perhaps the only valuable contribution you've made to my existence." They departed with unhurried confidence, leaving Marcus to face his unraveling life in full view of Washington's elite. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears of humiliation and betrayal, while the journalists exchanged meaningful glances, already composing headlines in their minds. Marcus Reynolds, who had built his career on family values and moral authority, stood frozen as 15 years of calculated decisions collapsed around him like a house of cards. The daughter he had rejected as a liability had returned as an architectural genius who had just removed the keystone from his carefully constructed facade. As cameras of news outlets captured the moment, the prestigious senator pale-faced, his wife horrified, and the powerful CEO with her daughter disappearing into the crowd, Marcus realized with crushing clarity that the political future he had sacrificed everything to protect was already circling the drain. While journalists from the Washington Post recorded every word and expression of the confrontation, Marcus Reynolds didn't realize that the true disaster was still to come. In less than 24 hours, his political career would be reduced to smoldering ruins, while the woman he had dismissed as insignificant would become a national symbol of resilience that America would celebrate. The Washington Post journalists captured every micro-expression as Marcus Reynolds's carefully constructed world imploded before Washington's elite. His face, drained of color, contrasted sharply with Rebecca's reddening complexion as tears of humiliation threatened to spill down her perfectly contoured cheeks. The crowded reception hall seemed to close in around them, whispers already spreading like wildfire through the assembled dignitaries. Dawn arrived mercilessly early at the Waldorf Astoria. Yasmin stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her suite, watching the Capitol awaken as her phone vibrated incessantly on the nightstand. The confrontation had detonated with more force than even she had anticipated. Every major news outlet had reached out for comment, her PR team forwarding increasingly urgent requests for interviews and statements. She picked up her phone, opening the Washington Post's digital front page. The headline blazed across her screen. "Presidential hopeful hid child for 15 years. Reynolds abandoned pregnant girlfriend. Called biracial child political suicide." Beneath it, a damning side-by-side photo. Marcus and Rebecca at a recent fundraiser juxtaposed with Alexandria's unmistakable resemblance to her father. Yasmin scrolled through the article, noting the meticulous reporting. Someone had already uncovered their old Manhattan address, tracked down former neighbors who remembered them as a couple. The reporter had even located the cafe where Yasmin had worked in Boston, interviewing a manager who recalled a pregnant woman desperate for work. The ringing of her phone interrupted her reading, Alexandria calling from her adjoining room. "Have you seen it?" Alexandria asked without preamble when Yasmin answered. "I'm looking at it now," Yasmin confirmed. "Are you okay?" A pause stretched between them. "I stayed with Jenna last night," Alexandria said, referring to her friend whose family lived in Georgetown. "I didn't want to be surrounded by reporters when they inevitably found us." Yasmin felt a pang of both pride and concern at her daughter's foresight. "That was smart. How are you feeling about everything?" "You always knew this would happen?" Alexandria asked, her voice carrying an unusual vulnerability beneath its analytical tone. "No," Yasmin answered honestly. "But I always knew our paths would cross eventually. Washington is too small when you reach the top." The hotel phone rang, the front desk reporting that several journalists had gathered in the lobby. Yasmin instructed them to direct all media inquiries to Obsidian's communications department, then returned to her conversation with Alexandria. "The probability calculations were always in our favor for an eventual encounter," Alexandria observed, retreating to mathematical certainty for comfort, especially once he announced presidential ambitions. After arranging for Alexandria to remain with her friend for another day, Yasmin attended a video conference with Obsidian's executive team. Their primary concern was ensuring the company remained insulated from any potential fallout, though several board members noted that their stock had already climbed 3 points in pre-market trading. "The narrative is entirely sympathetic to you and Alexandria," her chief communications officer reported. "Social media sentiment is running 93% positive, with particular emphasis on female entrepreneurship and resilience. We've received 47 speaking requests since midnight." Yasmin nodded, absorbing the information while maintaining her composure. "This isn't about Obsidian's brand position, it's about protecting Alexandria from becoming a media spectacle." Across town, Marcus Reynolds sat shell-shocked in his private study, watching his political aspirations disintegrate in real time. The television played on mute, his own face appearing on every channel beside graphics, asking variations of presidential candidate material with glaring red X marks superimposed. His campaign manager paced the room, phone pressed to his ear, his expression growing increasingly grave with each call. "The Hendricks family just pulled their support," he announced after ending a particularly tense conversation. "That's 40% of our first quarter funding gone." Marcus barely registered the words. He stared at his phone as text messages from once loyal supporters arrived in quick succession, each one more distant and formal than the last. The language of politics, he knew it intimately, the careful disassociation from a toxic asset. "Senator," his campaign manager's voice cut through his daze, "we need to draft a statement immediately, something contrite but dignified." "Where's Rebecca?" Marcus asked, suddenly realizing his wife wasn't in the house. An uncomfortable silence filled the room before his chief of staff answered. "Mrs. Reynolds left for her sister's home in Boston last night. Her personal assistant collected some belongings this morning." The doorbell rang, a rare occurrence at the senator's heavily secured residence. His security detail entered moments later, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Sir, there's a process server at the door. He insists on delivering documents personally." Marcus accepted the envelope with numb fingers, not needing to open it to know its contents. Rebecca had always been efficiently decisive in crises, a quality he had once admired. The notification of divorce proceedings felt like the final nail in a coffin that had been under construction since the moment he'd uttered those fateful words to Yasmin 15 years ago. By noon, the story had evolved from political scandal to cultural touchpoint. Video clips of the confrontation, captured by multiple sources, spread across social media platforms with millions of views. Alexandria's clinical dismissal of Marcus's technical expertise had become an instant meme, with young women in STEM fields adopting fundamentally flawed at best as a rallying cry against mansplaining. In the Georgetown home where Alexandria had taken refuge, she watched the unfolding spectacle with analytical detachment. Her friend Jenna's parents, both State Department officials, maintained a respectful distance while ensuring their home remained a secure sanctuary. "Did you always know who he was?" Jenna asked as they scrolled through news coverage on her tablet. "I knew his name," Alexandria replied carefully. "I had researched him, analyzed his voting records, studied his public statements, but knowing facts about someone isn't the same as knowing them." Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Meeting with legal team at 3. Arrangements made for secure transport." The Obsidian legal department had mobilized with military precision, preparing for every contingency from media harassment to potential custody claims, though everyone acknowledged the latter seemed unlikely given Marcus's desperate attempt to salvage his political career. By late afternoon, the narrative had shifted again as journalists uncovered that Marcus had hidden Alexandria's existence even from Rebecca. Anonymous sources from within their social circle revealed that Rebecca had undergone fertility treatments for years, believing herself to be the problem in their childless marriage. The pastor of the evangelical church where Marcus had cultivated significant support appeared on a conservative news network, visibly struggling to reconcile his personal affection for the senator with his moral obligations. "While we believe in forgiveness," he stated carefully, "we also believe in honesty and responsibility. Senator Reynolds will need to do significant soul-searching." At 6 o'clock, Alexandria arrived at Obsidian's Washington office through a private entrance, bypassing the reporters gathered at the main doors. She found her mother in conference with the company's general counsel and 2 senior PR executives. "The situation has evolved beyond a personal matter," the general counsel was explaining. "There are now questions about whether Senator Reynolds' position on the cybersecurity subcommittee represents a conflict of interest, given Obsidian's government contracts." Yasmin noticed Alexandria in the doorway and immediately concluded the meeting. Once they were alone, she embraced her daughter tightly. "You handled everything with remarkable poise," Yasmin said softly. Alexandria pulled back slightly, her expression troubled. "Did we destroy him? Was that our intention all along?" The question carried no judgment, only a characteristic desire to understand the parameters and outcomes of their actions. Yasmin considered her response carefully. "We didn't destroy him, Alexandria. His own choices did that. We simply existed in the same space without hiding who we are or what we've accomplished." Alexandria nodded slowly. "The statistical probability of his campaign recovering is approximately 7%, based on historical precedent for similar scandals." "That sounds about right," Yasmin agreed, suppressing a smile at her daughter's algorithmic approach to emotional situations. That evening, as they prepared to return to Boston on the Obsidian jet, Yasmin's phone lit up with a notification that Marcus Reynolds had issued a public statement. They watched together as he appeared on screen, looking haggard despite his expensive suit and professionally applied makeup. "I have made serious mistakes in my personal life," he began, reading woodenly from a teleprompter. 15 years ago, I made decisions based on political ambition rather than human decency. I apologize to Ms. Johnson and her daughter." He stumbled slightly over the words, unable to say "my daughter" even now, "for the pain my actions caused." Alexandria observed his performance with clinical interest. "His micro-expressions indicate prepared insincerity," she noted. "The left corner of his mouth tightens when he mentions us." Later that night, safely back in their Boston home, Yasmin received a call from Alexandria, who had gone to her room immediately after their arrival. "I've been thinking about him," Alexandria said without preamble. "Not as a father figure, but as a case study in consequences." "That's an interesting perspective," Yasmin replied, recognizing her daughter's attempt to process emotional complexity through intellectual frameworks. "His entire identity was constructed around a specific outcome, political power," Alexandria continued. "By removing the possibility of that outcome, we've essentially invalidated his entire value system." Yasmin considered this. "People can rebuild, find new values." "Perhaps," Alexandria conceded, "but the probability calculations don't favor significant personality restructuring at his age." A week after the conference, Obsidian's security team reported unusual activity at their headquarters entrance. Marcus Reynolds stood in the lobby, unshaven and without his usual entourage, requesting 5 minutes of Yasmin's time. After confirming that he was alone and had submitted to a security scan, Yasmin instructed that he be allowed up to her office floor. She watched on the security monitor as he entered, noting the physical transformation a single week had wrought. The polished senator had vanished, replaced by a man who looked to have aged a decade. His campaign had officially suspended operations 3 days earlier, major donors publicly distancing themselves from the scandal. Rebecca's divorce filing had made headlines, her statement mentioning profound betrayal of trust and irreconcilable ethical differences. "He's here," Yasmin informed Alexandria via text. "Would you like to be present?" Alexandria's response came quickly. "No, I'll review the security footage later. Statistical analysis suggests nothing meaningful will emerge from this interaction." As Marcus was escorted through the gleaming headquarters of the empire Yasmin had built, the reality of what he had discarded 15 years ago seemed to physically weigh on his shoulders. Employees glanced up from cutting-edge technology, recognition flickering across their faces before they returned to work developing systems that protected the nation's most critical infrastructure. While Yasmin observed his approach on the security monitor, she reflected that the true power hadn't come from exposing him publicly or watching his campaign implode. It had come from building something so extraordinary that when they inevitably crossed paths again, she could stand not in anger or vengeance, but in the calm certainty of her own worth. Marcus Reynolds stood in the reception area of Obsidian Tech Solutions, a shadow of the confident politician who had once commanded rooms with his presence. His expensive suit, normally impeccably pressed, hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight in the week since the confrontation. The receptionist regarded him with thinly veiled contempt, her fingers hovering protectively over the security alert button. "Ms. Johnson will see you now," she finally announced, her tone making it clear this was an extraordinary concession. Marcus followed the security escort through the gleaming headquarters, acutely aware of the sidelong glances from employees who recognized him from the news coverage that had eviscerated his reputation. Each step through the technological marvel that Yasmin had built from nothing hammered home what he had so casually discarded 15 years ago. The security officer stopped at an imposing door of dark wood and glass. 5 minutes, as agreed, he stated firmly. "You'll be monitored throughout." The door opened to reveal Yasmin's office, a spacious corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Cambridge skyline. The decor balanced technological sophistication with understated elegance, much like the woman who stood behind the desk, her posture betraying neither anxiety nor eagerness. "Marcus," she acknowledged simply, not offering her hand or inviting him to sit. He stepped into the room, suddenly uncertain what to do with his hands, with his body. The political training that had served him for decades offered no script for this moment. "Thank you for seeing me," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. "I can explain everything." "Can you?" Yasmin's expression remained neutral, her tone neither angry nor sympathetic. She leaned slightly against her desk, the position emphasizing her authority in this space. "I was young, ambitious, scared." The words tumbled out, rehearsed during sleepless nights since his world collapsed. The political climate 15 years ago wasn't what it is now. An interracial relationship, a child out of wedlock, it would have ended everything before it began. Yasmin studied him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a moderately interesting specimen. "I'm not interested in your explanations, Marcus. I didn't come this far to obtain your validation or approval." Her dismissal of his justification struck harder than any accusation could have. Marcus glanced around the office, noting the awards displayed with tasteful restraint, the photographs of Yasmin with world leaders and tech innovators. No personal photos graced her desk. Those he assumed were kept in more private spaces away from business visitors. "Your company is impressive," he offered, grasping for solid ground. "What you've built here, I built it despite you, not to prove something to you," Yasmin interrupted, her voice level but firm. "Your opinion of my accomplishments is irrelevant." Marcus swallowed hard, the reality of his complete inconsequence to her success settling over him like a shroud. For 15 years, he had occasionally permitted himself fleeting thoughts of Yasmin, imagining her struggling, perhaps regretting not accepting his check, maybe even watching his rising career from afar with regret. The woman before him had clearly never spared him such thoughts. "I want to know my daughter," he said finally, desperation edging into his voice. "I have rights." "You have nothing," Yasmin stated with absolute certainty. "Alexandria knows who you are now. If she wishes to know you, that will be her decision. She's 14, but she has more maturity and integrity than you've ever demonstrated." The truth of her assessment hung in the air between them. In the brief interaction at the conference, Alexandria had displayed more poise and ethical clarity than Marcus had shown in his entire political career. "She's extraordinary," he admitted, genuine awe breaking through his desperation. "Her intelligence, her confidence." "Yes, she is," Yasmin agreed, the first softening in her expression appearing at the mention of Alexandria. "None of which you contributed to beyond genetics." Marcus moved toward the window, gazing out at the Obsidian campus where hundreds of employees worked on technologies that shaped national security. The comprehension of what he had lost went far beyond the family he had rejected. It was a legacy, an empire, a future he could have shared in. "How much is the company worth now?" he asked, the old calculating part of his personality surfacing despite everything. Yasmin's slight smile held no warmth, only finality. "More than you'll ever be worth, Marcus, in every possible way." The words landed with precision, not as an insult but as a simple statement of fact. The security officer knocked discreetly, indicating the 5 minutes had elapsed. As Marcus moved toward the door, a final desperate question escaped him. "Do you think she'll ever want to know me?" Yasmin considered this, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the mother beneath. "Alexandria makes decisions based on data and value assessment. What value could you possibly offer her now?" Marcus had no answer as the security team escorted him back through the building and to the street, where photographers waited to capture his humiliating exit. 2 weeks later, Alexandria sat cross-legged in the primary testing lab at Obsidian, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she refined an algorithm. Yasmin worked beside her, mother and daughter synchronized in their focus as they tackled a particularly challenging security protocol. "He called again," Alexandria mentioned casually, not looking up from her screen. "Said he wants to take me to dinner, get to know his daughter." Yasmin kept her expression neutral, allowing Alexandria space to process her own feelings about the man who had suddenly appeared in her life claiming paternal rights. "What did you say?" Alexandria's fingers continued their rhythmic typing, her focus seemingly unbroken by the emotional complexity of the situation. "I told him I'm busy building the future while he's still trying to salvage the past." Pride and love surged through Yasmin as she recognized her own strength reflected in her daughter. The rejection that had once nearly destroyed her had instead forged something unbreakable in both of them. "That's my girl," she said softly. Alexandria glanced up, a rare vulnerability crossing her features. "Did I make the right statistical choice?" The probability variables were complex. Yasmin reached over, briefly squeezing her daughter's hand. "Some decisions can't be reduced to statistics, but yes, I think you made the right choice for you." They returned to their work, the comfortable silence broken only by the soft clicking of keyboards and occasional murmured technical observations. Outside the lab windows, the California sunset painted the Obsidian campus in golden light, a visual metaphor for the empire they had built together. "I've been thinking about quantum entanglement as a security protocol," Alexandria said after several minutes. "The theory suggests that observation of one particle instantaneously affects its partner, regardless of distance." Yasmin nodded, following her daughter's lightning-fast cognitive leaps. "Like us," she observed, "connected regardless of circumstances." Alexandria's rare smile illuminated her features. "Exactly. Unbreakable correlation, mathematically proven." As the evening progressed, they refined the algorithm that would protect critical infrastructure against the next generation of threats. Their work would safeguard hospitals, power grids, and defense systems, touching countless lives that would never know their names. 3,000 miles away, Marcus Reynolds sat alone in his Washington townhouse, surrounded by campaign materials that would never be used. Rebecca's lawyers had been efficient. Half the furniture was gone, leaving empty spaces that echoed with his footsteps. His phone remained silent, former allies and donors having quickly calculated the reputational risk of continued association. On his laptop screen, a news article featured Yasmin accepting an industry award, Alexandria standing proudly beside her. The caption identified them as the mother-daughter team revolutionizing cybersecurity. There was no mention of him, no acknowledgement of his biological connection to the young prodigy already making her mark on the technological landscape. He closed the laptop, unable to bear the visual evidence of all he had thrown away. The whiskey in his glass, his third of the evening, offered no comfort, only a temporary numbing of the realization that he had made the most catastrophic miscalculation of his life 15 years ago. Back in California, as the last light faded from the sky, Yasmin watched Alexandria explain a complex encryption concept to two senior engineers who listened with undisguised admiration. Her daughter's confidence, her brilliance, her ethical clarity, these were the true empire Yasmin had built, far more valuable than Obsidian's billions. Later that night, as they walked toward the car that would take them home, Alexandria paused, looking up at the company logo illuminated against the darkening sky. "Do you ever wonder how different things would have been if he hadn't left?" she asked suddenly. Yasmin considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "Sometimes. But then I look at who we've become, and I can't imagine a better outcome." Alexandria nodded, processing this with her characteristic thoroughness. "The statistical probability of achieving our current success metrics would have been significantly lower had he remained in our lives." "Precisely," Yasmin agreed, suppressing a smile at her daughter's algorithmic approach to emotional resolution. As they drove through the Silicon Valley night, Yasmin reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate young woman counting coins for prenatal vitamins to the CEO of a billion-dollar company that shaped national security policy. The path had been harder than anyone should have to travel, but it had led to something extraordinary. While the light of the entardecer californiano banhava o laboratório em tons dourados, mãe e filha continuavam seu trabalho, suas vidas completas e extraordinárias, enquanto a 3,000 miles de distância, homem enfrentava o vazio de suas escolhas em uma casa cada vez mais vazia. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.